Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Rory Reid from RoryReidArt.com, back again with part 4 of our tutorial on how to paint dark skin. We have this portrait that we've been working on for the past 3 episodes now, so if you haven't checked those out, go back and watch part 1, part 2, and part 3. They're all about an hour long or so over. A little bit over, I should say, and this one will follow suit. Basically what this is a deep dive into how I paint my acrylic portraits, specifically darker skin tones, and I'm just going in talking about what I'm doing, showing my palette, of course, displaying almost every brush stroke so that those of you who want to learn can actually sit down for hours on end and flesh out your technique as well, and just go from there. So we're back again, and for this session now, originally this was about a 2-hour session. I cut out a lot of the dead space and repetitive stuff to get it down to an hour, and I'm probably gonna end the series with the next episode, part 5, because to close it out. I did another 2-hour session in part 5, but I'll chop it down to 1 hour again and just show the important stuff, because at this stage in the portrait, it's very repetitive stuff, just cleaning up edges, smoothing out the skin with the same technique we've been using. And the more time you put in and spend doing that, the smoother and more realistic the skin tone will look. The total painting time on this portrait was about 7.5 or 8 hours from start to finish. And if I was trying to go for super realism, I would spend probably even more time, maybe another 5 hours or so on that. But for this portrait, I basically just focused on the values and the skin tone itself, and decided to end it there, leaving some parts unrendered, like for example the neck and the upper torso, leaving that a bit unrendered, in contrast with the face, which I did render out pretty well. So the goal for this session also is going to be just to clean things up. You see the left side of the face that's in shadow is pretty rough still. We're not going to render it out as much as the right side, but we're going to bring it up a notch. Bring it up a notch, especially the little highlight triangle under the left eye. We're going to give that a more natural shape as we go along. We are gonna touch the eyes a little bit. We're gonna clean up the nose as well, and we're gonna start on the lips also. Right now we still have basically placeholders for those major features. So now that I'm getting towards the end of the portrait, I'm gonna want to start putting more time into rendering these out, adding more details, and so on and so forth. And so you see the palette has remained the same. I haven't introduced any new colors up until this point. For part 5 we will be introducing some slight colors as well, some purples, lavenders, pinks, and yeah, I think that's pretty much it. And just some lighter values of blue as well that we're going to put into the pupil of the eyes, and it'll harmonize well with the background color that we have. The eyes are going to match the background color. As I said, I have already finished the painting as I'm doing this voiceover, so I'm aware of how it looks in the end, so keep that in mind while you're listening. But yeah, that was just a feature I chose to add to switch it up from the reference photo. The blue background is more of my style. A lot of my paintings does have this color, so I wanted to do that, and a nice way to tie it in with the figure itself is to match the eyes. Just, you know, just a neat little trick. You don't have to do it, but there are other ways to harmonize, as far as, you know, matching shadows or matching even midtones or even the highlights. You could do anything you want really to, you know, set that off. You can do. It's artistic expression. I just chose to do it this way, off the whim, off the fly, and you know, I love how it turned out. Either way, when you're doing this painting or another portrait for yourself, you can choose whatever you want to do as well, you know, and just execute it well, and it should work. So we're still using our raw umber mix, and just again cleaning up anywhere that I see is out of place or far out of place compared to the reference. So I'm still trying to match and fine-tune the values to the reference, keeping in mind that, you know, paint is not gonna look exact as the light in the photo does look like they're using some sort of spotlight or photography light with like maybe a softbox, because the shadows on the face are pretty soft in the transitional areas. So, you know, we're not going to get the values exact, but we're going to get them close enough so that the painting reads well. And that's, like I said in the previous video, that's basically all you want to do when you use a reference photo. You know, if you're not doing hyperrealism, then don't worry about the minor stuff. Just get your values, your shapes in the ballpark, and you're good to go. Like anybody that looks at the painting in real life or online, they're not going to be looking at the reference photo and comparing back and forth, you know, so it's not going to matter. As long as your painting is great, it'll stand on its own. No, there's nothing that's going to be taken away if it doesn't match the reference photo exactly. All you're doing is just using the reference photo as a roadmap. Cleaning up the eyes here a bit now, using the same technique, just getting our brown paint, placing the value where it needs to be, and then we're smoothing it out either with, like you see my finger there, or sometimes I use the clean filbert brush. Sometimes I just use the corner of the exact brush with the paint on it that I'm using now to just you know, blend it as I go with the same brush. It all depends. If I think I need more paint in that area, I'll use the brush that already has the paint on it. If I think I need less, I'll tap it with my finger to remove some of the paint. If it's just right, I'll probably use the clean filbert brush and just blend it in from there to match it as best as possible. Gonna mist the canvas there, as you just saw, to keep the paint active and easier to blend. And you can see on the right side of the face there, we're getting those really nice smooth blends, cleaning up the edge that goes into the shadow area of the hair. And with the clean filbert brush, you know, I make sure to take out the wipe out the excess paint, as you just saw me do there, and go back with the clean brush and just blending, sharpening that edge up, because that right side is going to be my main focal point. And as you can see in the eyes right now too, we still basically just have a placeholder. I did change the white part of the eye. I did use some of that blue color and mixed it in with the white to go over the whites of the eyes. And previously I had the raw umber mix in white, so it looked kind of brown. But now since I'm going for the blue eyes and the cool look in the eyes, I switched that out, and it's still basically just a placeholder. As we go along, we're going to add our form, keeping in mind that the eye is like a sphere or a spherical object. So we're going to shade it accordingly to where our light source is from the top right, and that will give it a three-dimensional look as we go along. Spraying the palette now to keep the palette wet on the paint wet on the palette, and yeah, this is just the same system we've been using. As I said, we're close to the end, only one more session to go, so at this point in the painting I'm basically just fine-tuning as best as possible, refining my shapes, matching values as close as I can, or as close as I feel is warranted, and then detailing from there. And if you notice from the previous videos, I started out the painting with the bigger flat brush, and as the painting has gone on, I've used smaller brushes on top of those big brush stroke layers, and that gives me a nice refined look. Like using the liner brush a lot more now in these latter stages, and smaller flat brushes, you know, that method works great, because if I see a lot of beginning painters that use these tiny brushes at the very beginning of the painting, and when you do that, your painting looks sort of choppy, and there's going to be a lot of areas where the the white canvas or whatever color your underlying layers are going to show through. So when you start out, it's good to use the big brush, because then you get to cover up a lot of the canvas or the surface area of the canvas. And then when you get into your later sessions and paint on top of those with the smaller brushes, you sort of chisel it down and it becomes more refined, you know. Hope that makes sense for you guys who are listening. I'm using now the liner brush to refine like the eyelid a bit. Got like one of the mid-tone mixtures on there, and trying to keep the indication of that in contrast with the shadow area of the bottom eyelid, to, you know, indicate that that plane is viewable. Again, just doing a quick blend / removing some paint with the finger touch there. All my existing painters out there knows that technique. And that's all this is, you know, it's just a dance, putting on the right amount of paint with the right viscosity or fluidity, and then making sure you keep it within whatever shape it is you're painting. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Blending any areas correctly, getting nice transitions on your blends. That's pretty much it. Doing some individual brush strokes on the eyebrow there, just to add some variety, because before I did just fill in the shape, and that's still holding its place there. Later on I will do a bit more work in rendering out the eyebrows. As you can see from the reference photo, there are some slight value changes as the eyebrow contours the face, so I'm just going to put the slight indications of those in as well as we go along. But as I said before, the eyes, nose, and mouth are going to be the star of the show, so things like ears, eyebrows, etc., I don't really focus on too much for this piece. And though the untrained eye or untrained viewer will be pretty impressed with where this portrait is so far, there is something to be said about the way I describe it is bringing the portrait online, meaning like if you look at the eyes right now, there's no sort of highlight or three-dimensionality to it. I know I see a lot of beginners and some intermediate painters that paint eyes like this where it's just flat. By the end of the 5th part of this series, you'll see the difference and how the eyes basically makes the entire portrait just come alive. Right now this just looks like a painting. Once you do a spot of rendering and realism in the eyes, it looks like a human being, so to speak. It's like, you know, like a robot coming online or something like that, if that makes sense. And see, when I apply the paint, I just use a slight crisscross. At this stage, I'm really not pressing down hard on the canvas at all. I'm just making sure that a few of the bristles on the brush touch the canvas, and doing like a real gentle just blend, real gentle blend. Always spraying the canvas, as you've seen there, to keep the paint that I've applied in this session active, and just blending as we go. I use my finger there to wipe off some of the excess water from around the area that I'm painting, so that none of them form drops and roll down over the portion that I'm painting, you know, in this case over the face. So I just used my finger and wiped off some of the excess mist or water from the hair and the background. Grabbing some of my shadow color now and touching up the eye area again. Just using, always glancing at the reference and just, you know, trying to match as close as possible. Not being too meticulous, just getting it in the ballpark, because it's gonna look great, you know, as long as you do that. And as any painter can tell you, this detail phase is what takes up the most time, because you're using basically a tiny brush at a pinpoint and just dropping paint in very tiny areas as we go. If you watch people who do hyperrealism, this is basically what they do for the entire painting. Whereas me, I don't really do that. I start off with the bigger brush to fill out the forms and the values that I need, defining all the planes at the beginning. Then towards the end, we come in with the tiny brushes and fine tune and detail on top of the building blocks we laid to begin with. And as you can see, the painting is beginning to look a bit more soft now. It doesn't look quite as dopey as it did before, even in this short amount of time. So here's where it takes, it starts to take shape and really starts to look impressive. And once we put in the work on the lips, nose, and eyes, which will be towards the end of this session, and then the eyes we're gonna, finish in the 5th part, the final part of the series. But in this session, I am going to touch the lips a little bit, and the reference photo does have a bee on her lips, but I didn't include that. Yeah, because as I said, this is just for painting skin tones. So All the extra stuff was not called for. And we're using just the smaller round brush now to drop in some of these subtle value changes around the eye. If you look at the reference photo, you can see, and that's what I'm doing now. As I said, using the smaller brush for details and trying to hone in on the values as close as possible. And it's a constant work in progress, you know, just bouncing from area to area, letting it dry, spraying the canvas, judging values, putting them down. Same old, same old. Also, another important thing to note is when we do get to the end, we're going to include some of our highlights, like the brightest areas you can see in the reference, like on the tip of the nose there to the right, on the lip, bottom lip there as well, on the upper lip there as well to the right, and like on the eye, the pupils of the eye itself, you got a couple of bright spots there, and on the right side of the forehead. So all of those are gonna basically jump up the effect. Right now everything is pretty just, you know, I don't want to say flat, but it's just dulled down because the values we're using on the palette are relatively close. So our contrast spectrum is not wide enough yet. We just have the darkest color on the palette to the left there, and then the lightest one we've mixed to the right as far as the browns go. So that's all we're working with. When we get closer to the end, we're gonna mix some brighter highlights using the background color just a drop with some white. And then we're going to put those in the right places. We're going to soften up the harsh color scheme with the brown skin right up against the blue background. We're going to add in some pinks and some lavenders. To do that, we're going to add some deep purples in the darkest shadows, like under the neck there. And all this kind of stuff will serve to add a softer, more interesting color scheme for the eye to pick up. Because even right now it just looks like I have the brown skin slapped up against the blue background. It doesn't look like she's in the atmosphere of the wherever she is, right, the room or whatever. Looks sort of unnatural, if that makes sense. So the way you get the immersion is add some of these background colors in like areas of the hair, in areas of the skin, the highlighted portion, yeah, and things like that, and everything will now blend together naturally, and it'll look like the blue light of the background or the room that she's in is gonna look like that. She's in that atmosphere. It's gonna look like that blue light is actually shining on her skin. And more of the same as well, just refining all of these midtones with the smaller detail brush. Every area that I touch with this small brush is getting rendered out a bit more than it was before, improving the realism effect even more as we go along. And again, you see the likeness is somewhat there, but it's still off, and that's because we haven't rendered out the eyes or the lips yet. And once we do those, the likeness will be more accurate to the reference, even though, as I said, it's still not going to be exact because I'm not going to take too much time to get it to match exactly. But it'll be close enough. It'll look like her. And now I decide to put some initial or some more work on the lips. So we're again going to try to bring up these values to match as closely as possible, and we're not going to get them exact, but we're going to get it to match as closely as possible and add some more details into the lip. Right now we just have the general values and they're all smoothed out, so you know it's not textured or anything, and we're going to attempt to fix that now. Go in with a small round brush, and I'm dropping in some of that lighter value on the bottom of the top lip because it's evident that her lips were glossy, like maybe she's wearing a lip gloss or she just licked her lips or something for the photo, but it did have a gloss effect, and we're gonna put that in as well because I think it works nicely, or it read well, you know, in the photo, so it wasn't like overdone. So for the painting itself, I think it'll work well, so we're gonna add that in for sure. We're not worried about it now, but you know, when we putting the final bright highlight spots, like on the bottom lip there and the top lip, the tip of the nose, when we put those in, you know, it'll all make sense. Those final brightest highlights are like magic. You'll be surprised the difference you see when you include those towards the very end. It'll take the portrait up a notch, just like when you render out the eyes. It almost has the same sort of importance. And it's important to keep your artistic mind open when using a reference, because not everything photography wise works well painting wise. You know, what might fit well for a painting as far as lighting and value goes may not read well when you you know, put it in the painting. Well, let me just say that again, not everything that reads well in a photo is gonna read well in a painting. So you gotta pay attention when you're copying or following the reference, and then asking yourself after you execute something, does this read well? Does it look good? Or does it look strange or out of place? And then you know, you're always open to changing it from what the reference is to something that will read better or read well as a painting. So now again, including some mid-tone shadows here, giving a bit more three-dimensionality to the lips. Yeah, this is all painting is, man. It's just, you have to be patient, you have to have a plan, know what you're doing, and just stick to the plan. A lot of painting or successful pieces, they're accomplished from the prep work you do, not necessarily coming up with things off the top of your head. You know, you're gonna have some spontaneous creativity that is required to fix problems, but I'd say 85-90% of your painting should have been figured out before you even start. Like for example, the spontaneous elements of this painting for me was the decision of the background color, matching it with the eyes, a little creative flair there, removing the B from her lip, how to render or not rendering out the hair, and also the decision of keeping some edges sharp, like on the right side of the face, and blurring out or leaving some edges slightly unrendered in the shadow areas. Things like that, you know, they're not major things, but they're important things that hold a lot of weight. And as you can see now, when I've included these small tiny brush strokes with the round brush, paying close attention to the value changes from the reference, you can see the lip already, the bottom lip already looks way more realistic. And if I was going for, like I said, hyper realism, we'd do another pass on that and just keep it going until we matched it to the reference. So we leave the lip area now and decided to touch up the nose again as well. That nostril that is on the left side of her face in the shadow area still is a notch too bright, so we'll look to remedy that as well as we go. Right side of the face in the light is looking decent, man. I love the bottom eyelid area, upper eyelid area. The cheek looks nice. Yeah, everything is coming together. This is a nice place to be, you know, after so many hours in. This is when the painting starts moving out of that ugly, dopey phase and starts looking like a real human, like a real person. If you guys follow me on Instagram and TikTok and the like, you would have already seen the completed version of this. I did post a time lapse of it over there, so those of you who follow me on there got a treat. This painting is, like I said, finished already, and I have already sold it, shipped it out earlier today. And yeah, it's off to a new collector. Big thank you to that collector for supporting the dream. And refining the upper lip area now. Smooth. Basically, as I said, just smoothing out everything, not leaving so many harsh lines in the face. Because if you look at someone's face, you know, the planes aren't really rugged and harsh. They're transitioned in through value changes in light, and you know, sort of smoothed out. So we try to accomplish that somewhat with paint as well. I do tend to leave some harsh lines in the shadow areas just because I love, like I said in all the previous videos, I love the variety of leaving a portion sort of unfinished in contrast with a portion that's highly finished. Just my personal style. If you look at all my portraits, you'll see this same sort of thing. Yeah, and for I think I mentioned this in the last part 3 as well, the last video, but for those of you who use acrylic painting, do make sure that you're using a glass palette or some surface that doesn't absorb water. That'll get your paints to stay open or wet the longest. So just a pro tip. What I do with mine is use the glass palette, and then I have a piece of Tupperware that I just spray water in the top of it and then put it over, and then just add a little weight on top to hold it down, and that'll keep my paint wet for like weeks. Well, not weeks, maybe one whole week. So for this painting here, it probably took what, like I said, 8 hours or so, spread out over a week, and I'm using the same exact paint mix that I did from day 1, so that's the value of it. This is the best way I've found. Like, I've used a wood surface before, like a, you know, handheld palette. That's just annoying, and well, with acrylic paint it's annoying. And I've used like a piece of actual acrylic, like plastic. That worked okay, but when it came time for cleaning, the paint adhered to it a little too well, so cleaning it was a nightmare. And also it started to warp after a while. I guess it, you know, absorbs water as time goes on, so started to get a little bend or a hump in the middle. So glass palette is the best. There's literally no problems with it at all. Also, using or keeping the reference on some sort of device that you can zoom into is a huge help. So you can't see this, but on my computer monitors there, on my second one that I have, I do have this reference photo pulled up, and you know, I can like zoom into it and see what's actually occurring in the little crevices and shadow areas, and I just try to mimic them as best as possible. Been painting for a super long time now, so I can, you know, just jump through and get them in the ballpark really quickly. Not a big deal. So as you can see, the lips have taken a step up so far already. Still a long way to go, but even this initial time spent has made a good improvement. Bouncing around as usual to let them dry, and then we'll revisit them once the paint sets in there. And I would say probably the hardest part about painting things in shadow, or even like using darker colors, is judging the value changes. And I don't recall if I mentioned it before, but that's why it's very important to use a palette system that works for you or to your benefit, because I have all my stops of light or my value changes mixed out already. So now I'm just picking some up and then just plopping it down on the canvas, and doing so I can trust that the value change is going to show up as the painting goes along, if you understand what I mean. Like sometimes when you put a value down that's close to a similar one, you can't really tell with your eyes. But if you know that on the palette it's mixed correctly, you can just trust in the palette and not necessarily in your eyes, and you know, apply it where it needs to be. And then of course after it dries, because acrylic does dry a little bit darker than when it's wet, so after it dries you can judge and make adjustments as need be. If it dries and it's still a little too dark, then just go one value over and take a little bit and add, and you'll lighten it up a bit, and then just reapply it and wait again and see. So you see the face does have an overall more softer look now as we've rendered it out a little bit more. Everything's coming together nicely. And normally when I'm painting nowadays, I do have more colors on the palette as I go. I would definitely have had like some reds on there to mimic the warmer skin tone more accurately, but as I said before, this video is just for this tutorial, so I want to keep it simple as to not get you guys too confused. So on the girl or the figure itself now, I'm using the brown colors that we mixed, and that's it. Sort of like a monochromatic painting, because doing a monochromatic painting forces you to pay attention to value, which is by far, I would say, probably the most important thing when painting. Because the changes in value shows the shapes of your planes and makes things look, you know, three-dimensional as opposed to flat and two-dimensional. So mixing out the value range is good, and that will help you a lot. And then applying the correct value to the different areas of the painting is another skill that you're gonna rely on heavily to make your paintings, you know, a notch above the rest. And so technically we're not even really worried about color that much. It's just brown. And everything you see, with the exception of the whites of the eyes and the pupils themselves, everything is painted with that brown mixture on the face, and you know, and the hair, of course. But as far as the skin goes, is just that brown mixture. If I was painting something like for a commission or something, like I said, I would already had some reds on the palette, purples, greens, and you'd have a lot of different subtle color variety in the overall portrait. I do some of that towards the end, so you'll see that in part 5. But yeah, for this part we stuck closely to the colors we already had mixed. So, and you're gonna see in part 5 the huge impact it makes. When I say that I'm gonna be adding color, I'm not talking about fully saturated bright colors. It's gonna be muted colors that change that when applied to the brown skin is gonna just bring it alive a little bit more. You're seeing some of that already with the orange that we mixed into the midtones of our brown mix. So you're seeing that happen already slightly. If you look on the right side of the face, it does have a tiny hint of an orange, orange tint to it. Very, very slight though. You almost can't even tell. And we're going to do the same exact thing when we added our pinks and our lavenders and our final highlights with the blue color, the ultramarine blue colors. Just slight touches. You saw I just sprayed the canvas there as well. Hydrated the paint again, and then we're using the filbert brush now to just blend and smooth out the areas. Very light touches. Not smoothing out all of the textures, just in certain areas that make it work. For example, on the cheek, having that kind of smooth is good, like the puffiness of the upper eyelid, eyebrow area, the outside eyebrow area, like the nose, the bulb of the nose, that kind of thing. If you look from the left side of the face in shadow all the way to the right, that's a nice value change, value spectrum, texture spectrum as well. Rough in the shadows, smooth and refined in the highlights. Of course, you don't have to do that. That's just what I chose to do for this one, and what I choose to do in a lot of my paintings. I like, ranges of color, ranges of hue, ranges of saturation, ranges of texture, ranges of, edge definition. Just makes everything a bit more dynamic. And as you can see, just look, the face, like it already looks amazing even at this stage now. Once we power her up with the eyes, it's gonna be amazing. Those are gonna be the two final touches. Fully rendering out the eyes. I think we begin to touch them a little bit here as well, maybe. And fully rendering out the highlights, being sure to drop in our super bright spots, as I mentioned before, on the bulb of the nose, upper lip. There's a little highlight there that's super bright, and on the bottom lip a little drop there as well. Once we put those in, it's going to be amazing. But again, we save those for last. And as you can, if you notice as well, the checkerboard effect that we did is working well. Like on the left side of the background, we have it lighter than the shadow side of the face, and then the shadow side of the face is up against the highlighted side of the face, which is up against the shadow side of the background slash hair. So it's light, dark, light, dark. Super cool. We're touching the eyes a little bit, and what I'm doing now is just working the shadows of the eyes. Basically adding some three-dimensionality to the shadows. So not much, we're not doing any color yet, just using the Ultramarine Blue, the Turquoise Blue mix, and black, dropping it down in value a little bit to put in the shadow areas of the eyeball. So right under the top eyelid, there's going to be a line of shadow that you can see that spans across the whole eye. In the corners of the eye as well, you got some slight shadow areas. You basically are painting this just like you'd paint a sphere, taking into account though that the eyelid and like different portions of the face itself are gonna cast, you know, small shadows on the sphere that is the eye. So if you, the way I think about it is, imagine that none of the other parts of the head were there, it was just a ball sitting there in open space, and that's how I would paint, with the light source coming from the top right down, and that's how I would paint the eye. And then I take into account the shadows that are cast by the upper eyelid, the eyebrow, you know, that sort of thing. I did leave the left eye that's on the shadow side of the face, I did leave that kind of bright just because I sort of enjoyed the slightly unnatural look it gave. Sort of, you know, it added a weirdo element to the portrait, which just makes it more interesting. You know, normally you'd have that eye, the left eye there in the shadow area. Normally you'd have it a bit more darker than the right one, but you know, I left it bright. Because why not? I do plan on making a series of doing these portraits. So in the future we'll, you know, play around. I'm not sure. Well, let me take that back. I'm not going to be making tutorials for all of those, but I am going to be painting more dark skin portraits almost exclusively. And you'll see like the time lapses of those on the channel, like I've uploaded before, you know. So you're gonna be able to see them, but I'm not gonna be making these big long tutorials for them, of course. Decided just to do this one to give some value back and to answer some of the more frequent questions I always get on IG and, you know, different social media. So now, for those of you who take the time to sit through this and practice as well, should be where I'm at, well, or closer than you were before, let me say that. Adding in some value changes and texture and abstractions now to the hair slash background. making sure some of those spill over a bit, just like, as I said, mentioned before, just to add a little bit of atmosphere, some highlights to the hair to make it appear that she's in the blue room wherever she is. And I know earlier I said I was going to put some of the braid marks in there on the right, but I ended up not doing it because didn't want to waste time doing it. I left just this, like you see this brush stroke I just put in there on the right where the highlight is me. That's where the highlight would be. That's where I left it towards the end of the painting as well. This whole section is in shadow, so trying to render out individual braids is not advised, because what's going to happen is your mind will start to play tricks on you, and you'll try to bring up the value of it more than it's necessary, and then what you'll end up with is a sort of unnatural look. So when working in shadows, like deep shadows like this, I always just suggest to make value indications or value suggestions and let the viewer's eye and brain figure it out. Does it look like a braid to you? No. Does it look like just regular long curly hair? Yes. Okay, well, that's what it is. Who cares? Each viewer will have a unique experience when they look at the piece. Cleaning up that line there even more on the edge of the face. Got the big, or well, it's not big, but the larger flat brush out now. Just doing some bold strokes. Dropping down shadow shapes, leaving just a hint or a suggestion of them. Paying attention to the contrast, the areas that are super dark versus the areas that are slightly lighter than that. That kind of thing is what we did there. And so yeah, if you look from when we started this session to now, you can see everything is just, you know, much better, with the exception of the neck and upper torso area, which I said, you know, we're not going to be rendering out too much. So the messy background with the messy neck and upper torso area with the messy hair, all of those work in concert together, and the star of the show is the face itself. Even more specifically than that, the right side of the face itself. So that's how you get, you know, variety in a portrait painting. You can think of it as any other painting, like a landscape as well, where you would leave things in the background a bit unrendered, and things in the foreground you would render out. If you want to get crazy, you could even flip that vice versa. Things in the background you leave a bit more unsaturated, things in the foreground you saturate out with bright color. You know, you can play with anything you want to play with, man. It's freedom of expression. And in doing things like that is how you develop your signature or unique style. See there, I used the palette knife and just scraped off the paint that I'm not using anymore, and look how quick and easy it cleans up. Because when you spray the palette as well, the acrylic paint doesn't adhere to the glass palette at all when you keep misting it throughout the session, so it just comes right off. Quick and easy cleanup. Mist our canvas as well. And if you notice, when I mist the canvas, the colors just pop right back up. Sort of like when you re-oil an oil painting. Like if you had an oil painting sitting out drying for a while and you haven't touched it, and then you went back to it to start up a new paint session, and you have to like re-oil it, and it makes all the colors come back up. That's kind of sort of like the same effect as what the spray bottle gives. And again, it allows you to see what the painting will look like after you varnish it. So it gives you a final preview of how your colors are going to look, so that you don't end up surprised, you know, when you varnish it. You're like, wait a minute, this doesn't look anything like when I was painting it. So those are some of the little quirks, you know, with acrylic paint, but you learn to love them. Got the big brush out again. This value is that I have on the brush is a little bit too dark, so we use our finger to remove excess paint and blend. And you see the area right above that left eyebrow, the one on the shadow side, it's a little bit too large and a little bit too bright, so we'll be looking to correct that and hone that in a bit more as time goes on as well. Things like that you pay attention to, you know, as you go. I'm just jumping around here and matching shadows. That's it. And if you look too on the right side of the face, on the highlighted side, you see it's somewhat similar to, I'm not sure if you guys noticed this. If you're a beginner, you pretty much won't notice this, but if you notice, the only thing that's missing now is those brightest highlights. And like if you're a beginner, you might not notice that. You're looking at the reference and you're looking at your painting, you're like, oh man, I still have so far to go. But in reality, the only thing that's missing is one mixture of a brighter value to match those bright spots, and we're gonna drop in like some minor brush strokes of those on, like, say the cheek, right on the top of the nose bridge there, on the right side of the forehead. We can drop a couple of those strokes in there. All of these super bright places on the reference photo. Once you match those, the painting is just gonna become even more, you know, spectacular than it already is. So it's important to recognize where you are and not get, you know, discouraged when you look at the reference and then look at your painting like, man, it just doesn't, you're just one step off. And you're gonna see that in part 5 when I mix that those final highlight colors. I'm gonna take some of that white I have on the palette and mix it with the reds that I'm gonna add, the purples that I'm gonna add, and the brown that I already have on the palette, and just match those super bright spots as best as I can. I'm not gonna do all of them because I think it looks kind of tacky when you have too much super bright highlights. So, you know, it sort of takes away the punch of the highlight when you have so many areas that are super highlighted. So just, you're gonna see how I execute it. It's gonna be really subtle, and then we're gonna drop in little dots like on the bottom lip, upper lip, nose bulb, that sort of thing, and it should be great. Working that little Rembrandt triangle again a bit. Have my dark color on the bigger flat brush, and just working the contrast a bit. That's all that I'm doing. You sort of want to make sure that you're stretching that value spectrum, meaning the lightest areas of your painting should be a good ways away from the darkest areas of your painting, the contrast. So the darkest area in this painting so far is the hair area on the lower right side there. That's the darkest area, and it contrasts well with the brightest area, with which you can see is probably the whites of the eyeball. And when I put in the final highlights, you know, they're going to be around the same, or no, they're going to be a notch brighter than the whites of the eyeballs now. So that's a nice wide spectrum of value. When you get more advanced, you can, you know, chop down that spectrum a little bit and make some interesting paintings in a smaller value range. But yeah, I wouldn't advise it if you're a beginner, because you'll get lost in the sauce, and doing paintings like that, you know, requires some level of expertise, in my opinion, to make them look good. Otherwise, you're just gonna have paintings that look really flat. I've only seen a few artists that can execute something like that well. And it's something I hope to do in the future as well, so maybe we'll catch one of those paintings on the channel in the future, where I don't have such a wide or a high contrast. Could be fun. And yeah, we're winding down on this session now. As I said, this particular painting session was my second to last one. It was about 2 hours long, and for YouTube I did cut out a lot of the dead space where I'm mixing paint and, you know, talking to my chat on Twitch, that kind of thing. So chopped it down to an hour, but you did get to see the majority of the brush strokes. So I think I'm going to do that again for part 5, which should come up next weekend. And yeah, that's going to be the final part. You'll see the completed piece, and then maybe after that I'll do an additional commentary on, you know, things I've, you know, like some final thoughts, things I would have done differently, etc., etc. But yeah, guys, I think this is where we decided to leave it for this session. So yeah, like and subscribe to the channel, please. I want to say a big thank you to all the people that have been subscribing lately. We're up to like 330 subs now, which is huge for me. Not so long ago I was still at, you know, in the 40s to 60 subs, so big ups to you guys. follow my Teespring and check out the store for some merch. The link will be in the description below. And yeah, I'm on social media, and if you want any prints or originals, be sure to check the link below as well. God bless you all. I'll catch you guys next time. It's your boy Trip. Peace.